Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first podcast for the 6-week challenge for May 2024, where we focus on training, recovery, and resting our bodies to make sure everybody is looking after themselves as best they can and achieving the results the best they possibly can. Which brings us to today's podcast. I'm very excited to introduce you to our nutritionist. She is our go-to nutritionist, Laura Sedgwick, and I personally have used Laura to help me with some of my own gut issues and make sure I'm looking after my own nutrition as best as I can. I know that a lot of our members have already met Laura, worked with Laura, and a lot of my clients have also seen Laura to overcome their nutrition adversity. So welcome, Laura. How are you
Thanks,
today?
Paige. I'm good. Thank you for that beautiful intro. And
You're
it was a pleasure
so
working with you
welcome.
as well.
Oh, it's it's helped me so much. And every time I get to a point where I start feeling my gut get worse, then I go back to the very strict stuff that I was doing to get rid of it, and it goes away like immediately. So thank you very much for your help.
Okay, it's what I love doing. So,
So before we start on the podcast, Laura, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Why did you get into nutrition in the first place?
I've always loved food. I've always been a huge foodie, so that's kind of one part of it. When I decided to become a nutritionist, a lot of my old friends from childhood were like, "Yep, that's what I can see you doing." Because I've always been, like the kid with the lunchbox that had all these like weird foods in there, which was good. But I also, my first job was in pharmacy, so I worked in pharmacies for like 8 years when I was, from 16. And so I think health has always been a huge part of what I'm interested in. But truthfully, it was a lot of my own health issues. Growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of like the diet culture, which I did get stuck
Yes,
into as
yes.
a vulnerable teenager, with some body image issues. And I'm not going to go into it in huge detail for time's sake because we've got some more exciting stuff to talk about. But maybe that's for another day. But, I had a lot of gut issues, a lot of hormonal issues, and was kind of sick of doctors telling me that everything was fine. And I'm going, no, something's wrong. I don't feel good. I was tired all the time. I was bloated all the time, having all these issues. So I saw some nutritionists and other health professionals and was able to figure out what was going on. And I loved it. And I was like, you know what? I want to be the practitioner that I wish I had when I was, in my early teen years going through all these diet
Yes.
issues, gut issues, all of these stuff. So I got stuck in, and it was probably the best decision I've ever made. And now I get to help people every single day with, feeling good, eating beautiful food, and talking about food all the time. So it's really fun for
It's
me.
it's funny you actually say that the diet culture back in the 90s. Do you did most of your food revolve around processed foods when you
100%.
were, yeah.
100%. Processed foods. It was a combination of like processed, diet foods. So everything was
Mm,
low fat.
yeah.
It was, no, you can't go for this food. It's this low fat kind of processed alternative is better than the real food, which now we
Yeah.
look back and go, oh my gosh, but that was just the way things were, and we didn't know as much as we know now. In combination with, I was getting a lot of like antibiotics as a kid. I think growing up, a lot of us, if we got a
Sure.
cold, we would get pumped with antibiotics. So I think it's a
Mm.
combination of kind of like diet, lifestyle stuff that really had an impact in those early years, which we know a lot
Wow.
more now
And
about the
I
power of real
think,
food.
yeah, well, that's true, but I feel like I think a lot of the general public maybe don't know how much we've progressed since then. Obviously, everybody knows about the diet culture, like low fat options were everything, and that was drilled into everybody, probably especially our generation when we were
Mhm.
kids. Um, how, at what point did that start turning around in the nutrition industry and people started to realize that actually low fat options are not the best option?
I think it was probably only about maybe 15, 20 years ago. So in the world of science, which is what we're
Mm,
working with, evidence-based nutrition, it's
mm,
not that long. When we've started to figure out that these processed foods were having an impact on us, and a lot of the nutrition science was being funded up until maybe like 20 years ago by these big corporations that were producing these foods. So
yeah,
you sort of, well, if the big corporations that are producing these highly processed foods are funding our studies and we're not getting a lot of independent research being done, then we're not going to get kind of unbiased nutrition science realistically. And, there's no one size fits all. There's different things that work for different people. But my philosophy around food is if we can go for those real whole foods first, and, processed foods kind of still have their place in terms of enjoyment. But from a nutrition space, if we're eating most sort of unprocessed foods, then we're going to get a lot more benefit for our gut, which is kind
yeah,
of where the science is going now in terms of nutrition is actually we're mostly made up of bacteria and that we should be feeding that, which again is another kind of conversation, and I'll touch on that a little bit later in a bit more detail. But as soon as we found out how important our gut microbiome was for everything to do with health, it became more about, well, how can we feed our gut bacteria? And the gut bacteria do not feed on processed food. A good
yeah,
gut
sure.
bacteria don't enjoy processed food. It's the whole foods that really.
Okay.
Um,
So you'd say your main focus now is gut health, and that's how you approach most people's situations.
yeah, 100%. I usually do sort of a gut first approach because the gut is really where, if we're supporting our gut, everything that we eat, comes through into the digestive system. So if we're supporting a
Sure.
healthy, strong digestive system, people kind of talk about that philosophy of you are what you eat. I always say, yeah, but you are what you digest and absorb and utilize. So it kind of
Yeah.
becomes more about, not just the foods you're eating, but kind of why you're eating them. Is your digestive system actually optimized to use them? Part of that comes into the gut bacteria space, but part of that just comes into kind of what you're eating, how you're eating, and all of the stuff around that too. So I usually have a gut first approach with most health concerns that I see, because
Okay.
90% of the time people will have some sort of gut impact, digestive impact, or a few other things going on there as well that we can pinpoint.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Do you have any like common nutrition misconceptions about nutrition that you would like to debunk?
My main one that I find myself constantly talking about is the concept of the most important thing in nutrition is calories. Or here in Australia, we kind of use the term kilojoules, but I think most people are more familiar with calories. Basically, the amount of energy that our food is giving us, in
Hmm.
terms of like cellular energy to function every day. A lot of people think that nutrition is simply calories in versus calories out, and that, that's all that really matters. But it's not true. Like I said before, it's not just you are what you eat, it's what you are digesting, absorbing, and actually utilizing in the bodies. So all those
Yeah,
different
true.
nutrients come from whole foods, are just as important, and it's not quite as simple as just how much energy the food could be giving you. It's a bit of an old school theory now. We've figured
So
out.
basically, what you're saying is I guess each calorie from certain foods is digested in a completely different way and therefore gives your body a different amount of energy.
Completely different amount of energy, but
Okay.
you as an individual could utilize that amount of energy completely differently. So somebody, you and a friend could eat the same amount of calories. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be actually absorbing the same amount of energy from that food or
Sure.
using the same amount of energy, from that food. And it sort of depends on what it is. So the
Okay.
calories theory, I think, is starting to be not used as much. It's not unimportant, but it's not the be all and end all of nutrition and health long term.
Okay. I think that's a great starting point of debunking. Because I don't think many people really know that. I think one of the biggest questions that we get on a daily basis, I would say, is how much protein someone should be eating, and also, I mean, we get this question quite a bit. Does protein make me fat?
Interesting.
So,
Okay.
yeah. So
Protein.
A question for you on protein. I think the best place to start is, what is protein? Like, what does it do in the body? How is it used to help us perform better?
Yeah, so protein in its simplest form is broken down into something called amino acids. So it's like the building blocks, basically, in terms of protein. And protein is used for almost every single process and cell in the body. But when we think of protein, usually, especially for people doing things like the challenge, they'll think of protein as being something that to do with building their muscles and supporting muscle development, which yes, it is. It's very important for building and repairing muscles. But we also need protein for developing our brain chemicals. So when we think of brain chemicals, we think of things like serotonin, people might have heard of as like the feel-good mood chemical for our
Hmm.
brain. So if we're not eating enough protein, we can sometimes find that we have, poor muscle strength or poor muscle building and muscle growth. We find that our mood suffers as well. It also impacts how well we sleep. Also impacts kind of our skin and our hair and all of our cells in the body. So protein is what's known as a macronutrient, which means we need a certain amount or a larger amount than the micronutrients. So
Hmm.
macro being protein, fats, and carbs, micronutrients being things like your vitamin C's, vitamin D's, all the vitamins and minerals. But we need a lot more of things like protein in our diet. And it's one of the things that I find people can sometimes suffer with in terms of they're either not eating enough protein throughout the day, they're not prioritizing protein throughout the day, so then their mood suffers, like, they're exercising but they're not building muscle and muscle strength, or they kind of go to the other extreme where they're eating way too much protein, and they feel awful. And I have seen both kind of ends of the spectrum. More often than not, people aren't necessarily eating enough,
Right.
but I have people who are kind of going for that all in. They've heard something on Instagram that they have to eat like, you know many milligrams or many grams of protein, like 300 grams of protein or something ridiculous. And they're trying to eat way too much, and it just doesn't serve them well either. So,
Okay.
in terms of the question, does protein make you fat? Most people don't have to worry about that. If you eat too much of anything, regardless of what it is, it will be stored as fat. Fat is basically your body storing energy, storing excess energy for a famine or for the winter or whatever the body does. We're working with a pretty primitive body here that doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily mean that it fits into our modern lifestyle. But, most people don't eat enough protein, and protein in itself is quite satiating. So if you're eating enough protein, it takes a little bit longer to break down and it fills you up a little bit quicker than things like carbohydrates. So people will find if they're prioritizing protein as well as having some other things as well, that they feel a little bit more satiated. And
Right.
in terms of how much do we need, because that's the biggest question I always get asked, well, how much protein do I need in a day?
Yep.
Truthfully, when it comes down to nutrition science, it's super varied, which I hate. People hate when I go, well, it depends, because everybody is
Nobody
individual.
wants that answer.
Nobody wants that answer. Everyone just goes, tell me a number, tell me exactly what I need to do. But as a basic kind of outline, we need about 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if you're someone who weighs 70 kilograms, you're looking at about kind of roughly 70 grams as a minimum of protein per day, just depending on your individual goals. So you
Hmm.
might need a little bit closer to kind of 1.5 to 2 grams if you're looking at putting on muscle, or if you're somebody who has, for example, some other issues going on, you might look at more of that 1 gram of protein per body weight, per
Yeah.
kilogram of body. So yeah,
Okay.
1 to 2 grams roughly per kilogram as a
Okay.
guideline.
That's good. That's good for people to know. One thing that fascinates me about people's perception of protein um, is protein powder. So
Yes.
essentially, I do find a lot of people think that protein powder is made to make you bulky. And this is something that I've continually been asked for my whole career. It just still doesn't stop. And to, to be honest, in 2024, I really thought that people would start getting it, but I don't know if people have started getting it yet. But um, how do you explain to someone that protein is protein? And essentially, yes, this is broken down differently, but a piece of chicken and protein powder are still giving you, say, 20 grams of protein. But
Mhm.
people are not second guessing eating chicken, but they're second guessing taking a protein shake because they think it will make them bulky.
Interesting. I usually see it
Yeah.
the opposite way of people wanting to get more protein shakes in because they want that kind of muscle growth. Like
Okay.
protein powder is just a supplemented form of protein. So like you said,
Yeah.
it's exactly the same as eating chicken or eating eggs or eating kind of even some of those plant-based protein sources like lentils and chickpeas and beans or
Right.
tofu. It doesn't matter what the source is, you're still getting protein. Protein powder, I think it's kind of been pushed by the bodybuilding industry a little bit more. So a lot of us
Yeah.
will think of protein powders, will think of people who are wanting to bulk up a little bit in terms of muscle.
Mm.
But no, protein powder is just a supplemented form of protein. So if you're somebody who does struggle to get in enough protein throughout the day, especially for some of my, vegan or vegetarian clients, you do have to put a little bit more thought into getting enough protein. You
Mm.
can definitely get enough protein, but you do have to be making sure you're having a variety of sources to get all of the different types of amino acids, those little building blocks of muscles and cells that I was talking about before that basically make up our proteins. So protein powder can be a really good way of getting it in, but it won't make you bulky unless you're eating way too much. Like I said, eating too much of anything is going to make you store fat. So it doesn't make you put on muscle. It just helps with that muscle growth. You do have to be doing the exercise to be building that muscle as well. And the food is just the fuel for kind of building that. We can't decide where the protein goes. The body decides where it needs to be, where it needs to go. So yes, if you're doing some exercise, a lot of that protein will go to helping repair that muscle and grow that muscle and support that nice muscle growth. Not from a bulky perspective, just purely from a strength perspective.
Hmm.
But if you're not producing enough of, like I was saying before, those feel good brain chemicals like serotonin, and you get a bit more protein in, your body will probably try and prioritize some of that protein going to producing those as well. So,
Right. Good.
not just
Yes.
for one, it's not going to make you bulky. Don't
Yeah.
worry.
Right. Thank you for debunking that. Okay. Well, moving on to carbohydrates then, because that's another big question we get around sugars, and I think there's definitely a lot of people don't know that sugar is a carbohydrate.
Mhm.
So, what is the difference between different types of carbohydrates? I know that's a big question, but
It is a big
is there
question, and
anything?
I could talk for an entire hour just on carbohydrates. But to put
Yeah.
it simply, carbohydrates break down, regardless of if it's carbohydrates coming from a potato or carbohydrates coming from a spoonful of sugar. It's
Hmm.
broken down into its simplest form, which is glucose. Now, glucose is basically the simplest form of body energy. It is the preferred source of energy for our brain and most of our muscles. So it's absorbed pretty quickly into the body. And you might have heard of people kind of wanting to reduce those blood sugar spikes.
Hmm.
So it's two different, we can break carbohydrates down into what's called simple carbohydrates, which are basically the ones that are broken down and absorbed by the body really, really quickly. So they spike the blood sugar really, really quickly. But what goes up quickly must come down quickly. So we end up with these big spikes of energy or blood sugar, or if you think of if anyone's had way too many lollies as a kid, you end up with that kind of sugar rush. That can basically, be what happens if we have too many of those simple carbohydrates. And
And
they're things
a
white
simple
bread,
carbohydrates. Yeah.
yeah, white bread, table sugar, lollies with sugar. Essentially, what simple carbohydrates are is carbohydrates without enough fiber, healthy fats, and protein to stop the sugar from getting into the bloodstream really, really quickly. Then we've got something called more complex carbohydrates, which is things like your brown rice, high fiber pastas, things with a lot of, or vegetables even, things with lots of fiber in them, or lots of healthy fats, or some protein. And what that means is that it doesn't spike your blood sugar quite as quickly because it takes a little bit longer to break down in the gut and absorb into the bloodstream. So you end up getting kind of a slower increase of energy from blood sugar
Hmm.
rather than that spike and then that big crash like we get from sugars, which is why we don't want too much sugar, because we
Hmm.
don't want these big spikes of blood glucose really quickly. We want that sort of sustainable, slow release energy. Not only from a mental health perspective to kind of get us through the rest of the day, but also to sort of support our exercise. We don't want to be having these kind of big spikes and then big crashes halfway through a session, if we're doing a longer session.
Yeah.
But both of them have a place. It's not to say that you can never have any of these simple carbohydrates as
What would
well.
you say the best place for simple carbohydrates is?
The best place for simple carbohydrates is people who are doing those, more of those intensive exercises. So you think about people who you might have heard of those. I don't recommend them, but those glucose gels that people will have
Hmm.
for when they're doing things like marathons and running events and those kind of, more for athletes, because
Yeah.
simple carbohydrates are going to give us that quick energy. For some people, if they want, if they feel like their energy is reduced and they need a quick kind of hit of simple carbohydrates, you can go for more of those just before a workout, because your muscles are going to be using that blood sugar in that
Hmm.
moment. But
Hmm.
what we want to try and avoid is, if we're tired, reaching for things like lollies, chocolates, those sugar hits, because you're going to get, yes, you're going to feel energized for maybe half an hour max, and then you're going to feel more exhausted in the long run. So
Yeah.
then we go for more of, if we're going for more of those complex carbohydrates, so things that are really high in fiber
Hmm.
specifically, then we're going to feel a little bit more satisfied. Our energy is still going to be lifted, but not in like a really quick spike and then quick drop way. Or we're not going to be putting ourselves on the blood sugar roller coaster, as I call it.
The blood sugar roller
The
coaster.
blood sugar roller coaster. It's not a fun roller coaster, and we want to get off that. We want a nice, gentle coastal drive in terms of blood
Yes.
sugar.
Okay. All right. I think that's really helpful though, because there's definitely a place for simple carbohydrates. And
There is. And then,
yeah,
look, there are some people, people with type 1 diabetes and stuff that will need sometimes more of those simple
mm,
carbohydrates. But that's a completely different story. For the average person, we want to be going for more of those, fruits, which are carbohydrates. Fruits are carbs, they contain sugars, but they also contain a lot of fiber. Vegetables, same sort of thing. Whole grains that are less refined, so things
mhm.
like brown rice, spelt pastas, all those things that contain a lot more fiber, is going to be much more beneficial, not just from an energy perspective, but also for feeding your gut bacteria as well.
Yeah, yep. That because that's the key. That's the main thing.
Yeah. It's
It's
not, we're
what we
not
need
just
to
feeding
focus on.
ourselves with nutrients, we're also helping to feed our good gut bacteria to thrive, because they actually
Yeah,
support the production of other nutrients for us as well. We work in harmony with
right.
our gut bacteria. Again, that could be a whole nother episode another time.
We could do another one. Okay, well, here's an interesting thing that we also face quite a bit with members and clients is when people are trying to lose weight, they severely restrict their eating to
Hmm.
to try and lose weight faster. So they obviously, I mean, essentially are starving themselves.
Hmm.
Um, why is this counterproductive? What's bad about that?
So I see this all the time with my patients that come in to see me for weight management. They've been starving themselves. There's something called basal metabolic rate. Without getting into it, it's basically the amount of energy or calories that your body burns just existing. So you could
Mhm.
be in bed, doing absolutely no exercise, just, needing a certain amount of energy to digest your food, to utilize your brain, to repair cells. We need energy, and we actually need energy to burn fat. If you think of it kind of like an oven, like you need some heat to cook. Basically, when we're burning fat, we're kind of cooking our fat stores. So when we think about weight management, it's usually about body fat for most people.
Mhm.
So we need to actually be giving our body the energy to increase our metabolism to burn that fat. So sometimes people will actually need to eat more if they've been restricting for quite some time. Yes, they'll put on a little bit temporarily, but they'll need to eat more to increase their metabolism first before they can actually lose the fat. Because it's almost like if you're restricting yourself, your body goes into like an energy saving mode. where it'll go, okay, something's wrong. The body might think it's in a famine because you're not restricting so much. And then it goes, well,
Sure.
I'm in a famine. If I'm in a famine, I need to reserve my energy stores, which is your fat stores.
Yes. Wow.
So that's what I see most often is people restricting too much, and it just makes you feel crappy. You don't want to
Mm,
be feeling like that. You're not getting enough nutrients to support, like I keep going back to those feel good chemicals like serotonin. You're probably not getting enough to produce those. So you end up feeling miserable and tired and exhausted, and yeah, it's not a fun time.
okay. That's a really good way to put it actually, that you need the energy to burn the fat. I've never been never explained it like that to people. I like that. I'll probably switch and start using that.
It is quite complicated. That's the simplest terms, and it's different for everybody. There might be some other reasons kind of coming into it for why people maybe not losing the weight that they want to lose.
Yeah,
The gut comes into it. There's hormones that come into it. There's a lot of other stuff, but in its simplest form, we need to be eating enough to
right.
reduce that as well.
Okay. One thing that I would love my the members and clients to start getting a little bit better at is intuitive eating.
Yes.
However, I know it's a very, very hard to learn how to do.
Mhm.
And to be honest, I don't really know how to teach someone to do it. So I thought you might be the best person to ask. Well, what are your tips on how to get better at intuitive eating?
Yes, look, it's difficult. It's a practice. This is one of the first things that I often teach my patients how to do. And I tell them if you have had a lifetime of ignoring your hunger and fullness cues, like going, I'm hungry.
Mm,
For example, if people are trying to lose weight, often they'll ignore their hunger, their true
mm,
hunger. And so they don't know when they're hungry. And then they might overeat at certain meal times or especially in the evening to the point of to the point where they're kind of feeling like they're bursting and they're so uncomfortable. And it really does mess with your hunger and fullness hormones and cues and learning how to tune into that. So the first thing I recommend people do is firstly slow down when you're eating because hormones are not quick things and our hunger and fullness cues are hormones. So slow down when
right.
you're eating. Chew at least sort of 20 to 30 times, which I know for a lot of people might sound like a lot. It might sound really like, oh my God, I have to sit there counting how much I chew.
That's a lot
You
for me. It's so
It's a
hard.
lot for a lot of people, especially if you've had a lifetime of racing and chewing really, really quickly and eating really, really quickly and kind of eating on the go. It's like anything that's new. It's like any new habit. We need to practice it. It's
Mhm.
not going to come to you straight away. It's not going to be easy. There needs to be a bit of mindfulness and thought put into it. So, slowing down and chewing is the biggest thing. At least if you're not counting, at least chewing it until it's kind of like almost like a baby food consistency, ideally, in terms of
Okay.
food.
Mhm.
That's the first thing because digestion starts in the mouth. So that can help to stimulate some digestive enzymes, meaning that you're actually absorbing your nutrients from your food. It can also kind of tell the brain, hey, the digestive system's on, we're about to eat. So the brain and the gut are connected. Then the
Sure.
second thing I recommend is eat until you're kind of 80% full. So there's usually a point if you're eating slower and you're not eating where you're sitting on your phone scrolling or distracted by too many things, and you're actually sort of feeling when your stomach's full. Um, you go, I'm kind of starting to get full, but I'm not sure. Stop at that point. If you're starting to get full, stop at that point. You can keep going if you want to, or you can put the food away and come back to it at a certain point in time. There's no one kind of telling you that you have to finish that food all in one go. But I think a lot of us grew up, well, I definitely did, with like sitting at the table with family and mum and dad going, you can't leave this table until you finished everything on your plate. So,
Yeah.
first of all, if we've grown up with that mentality, which I know I did and a lot of my patients have too, then overriding this is going to take some practice. There's no
Yeah.
one now as adults telling us that we have to finish everything on our plate, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
If your partner is or friend is or whoever it is, then just tell them, no, no, I'm listening to my body. I'm doing what's right for me. You have to wait about 15 to 20 minutes before you decide to eat more because that's how long it takes for that hunger hormone to be released from the stomach and reach the brain to tell your body it's full.
Wow.
Um,
That's a long
the fullness.
time.
It's a long time, and a lot of people don't realize that it's about 20 minutes on average. It can take a little bit longer for some people and a little bit less time for others. So if we eat eat until we're kind of starting to get that to that full point where we're not completely uncomfortably full, but we feel satisfied with what we've eaten.
Yeah.
Put the food away, put it in the fridge if you need to, come back to it kind of 20 minutes later if you need to, or 20 minutes later, you might be like, actually, I'm done. And that's
Mm.
okay. And you can come back to it in a couple of hours, it doesn't matter. But I think a lot of people will eat on the go, they're not chewing their food, and they're not taking that kind of 20 minutes to check in with themselves and see if they're full. A lot of us will sit there eating lunch, scrolling in our phones, distracted by things like reels on Instagram or whatever we're distracted by. And that can also mean that we're not tuning into the sensations in our body. So it's a practice, but starting with, yeah, eating and chewing really, really well,
Hmm.
stopping when you're 80% full, and then waiting 15 to 20 minutes before you decide if you want more food are kind of the three starting points of intuitive eating. And even if you just do it for one meal each day, even if it's just dinner or breakfast, but pick a meal each day, start by practicing that. Over time, it will become more intuitive, more mindless. It will just be
Yeah.
naturally part of what you do. But if it's not going to be overnight that you can kind of do this, especially if you've been eating
Yeah.
really, really quickly or eating the entire plate until you're a bit more uncomfortably full for most of your life.
Yeah.
Takes some time. And even I grew up eating really quickly and eating everything on my plate and struggled too. Even sometimes I struggle with it on occasion. If I'm really excited about the food, if I'm like, this is so delicious, I don't want to stop. But at the end of the day, if you're eating too much to the point where you're uncomfortably full, your digestive system's not going to be able to cope very well with getting all of those nutrients from it, and it's going to make you feel a little bit sluggish, a little bit slow, and a bit blah as
Sure.
well. Yeah.
Okay. That's yeah, look, I eat really fast. It's still something I'm trying to work on here, but I'm working on it. But
Work in progress.
what about people who are like really busy and like, because I know people who won't just don't even eat lunch because they're too busy for lunch. Um, what about those kind of people who just need to scoff the food down as quickly as they can, because they just don't have a lot of extra time? How can we make meals or snacks easier for them, in a digestive way, I guess?
There's a few things. Look, I would say if you're somebody who is too busy to eat lunch at all, and I have patients who are like this,
Mm,
it's actually because you're not prioritizing it. And food is a basic need.
mm,
Food is a basic human need. If we're not feeding ourselves, if we're not eating enough, our body systems aren't going to be working as well. So a lot of people I see will prioritize their work over taking a lunch break. And it doesn't have to be an hour lunch break. It can be like 15, 20 minutes. It doesn't have
yeah.
to be ages. Or if you can, even if you have half of your lunch, if you only have sort of 5 minutes or have a few bites of lunch and come back to it later, at the end of the day, we still need to prioritize breaks, and you will be a more productive person. You'll be able to concentrate more. You'll be able to get more done at work if you're taking dedicated breaks, especially meal breaks, to refuel yourself. It's kind of like a car that's running out of petrol, but you're expecting it to still go the distance. It's not going to happen. You might be able to push through, but at the point, there's going to be come a point in time where you're not fueling your body with enough food. It's going to go a bit more into that survival mode. You're going to be more stressed, less productive, more tired. It's not going to work. So definitely making it a priority is the biggest thing wherever
Mhm.
you can. And for some people, that can be scheduling it in, like it's just as important as a meeting, a lunch
Yeah.
break. Trying to decide what works for you. Some days might not be able to schedule it in as much. You might look at something that's a little bit easier to digest, like a smoothie that's got all the nutrients you need in it, or a soup, or something that's a little bit more digested because it's already kind of
Yeah.
blended.
Hmm.
And obviously, then you don't have to chew that. So you're kind
Yeah.
of taking out a little bit of that element too. It's a little bit easier, but
Hmm.
prioritizing, especially lunch breaks, is hugely important and something I don't see people do enough, I think.
Yeah. And do you have like, I don't know, a top three go-to healthy snacks for busy people? Is that something you've got on hand, or?
Pick three. Oh my gosh. One of my favorite ones at the moment is there's I think it's Edgel do like these little chickpea, bean, vegetable, like little tins. They're little tins that you
Yes.
in the bean section of the supermarket, but you don't need to drain them. They come with like some olive oil. Sometimes they come with flavorings like garlic or herbs. Some of them have got like corn and tomatoes and other
It's
stuff in there too.
kind of like canned
Um,
tuna, but chickpeas.
yeah, like canned tuna, but it's chickpeas. And the reason I
Yeah.
recommend that, people think maybe it's a bit weird. Maybe it's like a classic nutritionist snack. I don't know. But a lot of us don't get enough fiber in. So the more that we
Uh-huh.
can kind of get fiber and other nutrients in there with our snacks, the better. And that's something you can have in the bottom of your work bag for, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, I haven't had enough time. Oh, I've only got 5 minutes to eat lunch, but I only have time for a snack. Grab that, and it's a little bit of, a little bit of protein. You're getting the fiber, you're getting some healthy fats from that, and some other
Yes.
nutrients because they're vegetables. Um, but fruit's a great snack. Things like
Mhm.
bananas and apples, again, are the kind of grab and go, really easy. They've got their own packaging. You don't need to do anything with them. You don't necessarily need to chop them up. You can just take them. Again, high in fiber, high in certain nutrients. I'm a massive fan of hummus. Love a
Mm,
good dip. So,
mm, me
whole
too.
grain crackers or something dipped in hummus, or vegetable sticks dipped in hummus are really kind of easy grab and go. I will say a lot of the snacks that you find on the supermarket shelves, especially in the health food aisle of the supermarket, are pretty processed and not so great for our gut. So, looking for things with minimal ingredients, with ingredients that you recognize, is going to be the best thing to do. And the more that we can kind of prepare snacks from whole foods, the better. But look, there are times where you can't necessarily do that. And I love things like little protein balls, or bliss
Mm.
balls, some people call them, which is like, some dates, some nuts or seeds, sometimes some protein powder and stuff all thrown together as like a quick energy snack,
Yeah.
especially kind of before it workout. They're always really fun as well. And you can buy some in the health food section. I think there's one called Tom and Luke's, which is not bad.
Mm,
There's a
very
few other
tasty.
I think actually there is one brand I
Tasty,
think called
yeah. Very tasty.
and there's another company that's a Melbourne-based company that I actually used to work with. This is not
Oh,
sponsored at all, called Koja.
okay.
They're all about real food snacks as well. But yeah, getting used to kind of looking at the labels and seeing if you recognize the ingredients. And if it's like a library book of ingredients and you go, oh, I don't know about that, and it's got emulsifier number this and number this and number this, it's probably not going to be great for your gut, and you don't want to be having it too often.
Yeah, okay. Good, very good to know because I think people do go for those snacks because they're in the health section.
Yeah, I will say a lot
Um,
of them where they
mm,
say like high protein this and low carb this and low calorie this and added this, and most of those things, if they're having to add all of that, have taken out a lot of the good stuff.
yeah,
And it's just what we call kind of health marketing.
yeah.
The best
Oh,
healthy foods are ones that actually don't have labels. And I know that's not always doable, especially if you're kind of on the go. So there are some good ones out there, and getting used to looking at the ingredients is really important. Not in
yeah,
like an obsessive way, just in a knowing what you're actually putting into your body kind of way.
yeah. I actually well, I got tricked by a yogurt company.
Mm.
So the yogurt, there's like I won't name the brand, but there's one that's just normal, natural. I think it might be Greek, I'm not sure. And then there's like a protein one. So it says protein.
Mhm.
And it's like says there's 14 grams per serve of protein. It's like double the price of the normal one, right?
Yep.
Each serve, this one, the protein one had 14 grams, and the other one, it had 13.8 grams.
Yep. Yep.
And I was like, I've been paying double price for for 20 grams of protein.
Yep.
Not like, oh my God, it was like the smallest amount.
I know. And they do.
So
A lot of the companies will add stuff in, and you think, especially if it's like low fat, low calorie, like anything low, or a lot of them are adding protein in there. It's like, well, what are you doing to add your protein source? Where's the actual protein source coming from? Is it like a
yeah.
completely refined protein source? Or with yogurt, like yogurt is a source of protein in itself. You don't have
Uh-huh.
to go and adding in stuff, you know.
So have they taken stuff out? Yeah.
They've
It's
probably taken stuff out to add stuff in. It's like
yeah.
going back to kind of that low fat movement, a lot of the time they remove the fat, they have to add something else in, and what they'll add in is sugar. So
Mm-hmm.
having a look and seeing that, yeah, again, the ingredients and getting familiar with those things is really important.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't have any other questions that have come through, but do you have anything that you would like to talk about for the upcoming challenge?
I just want to say, look, especially if weight management is your goal, please make sure that, you start. I think starting with the intuitive eating is going to be really, really important. For anyone that hasn't tried it, I would definitely encourage you to try eating a bit more intuitively and know that it's going to be a process.
Mm.
Um, and listening to your body, a lot of the times, especially when we're increasing the exercise, as you're potentially going to be doing with the challenge, depending on what your goals are for the challenge, we want to be making sure we're fueling around that. So something I like to talk about in terms of fueling for your workouts, and I will be putting this in my emails, which will be coming to everybody soon as well. But basically, carbohydrates beforehand. So that could be like a banana before a workout, or even a
Mhm.
meal, breakfast or something before a workout if you're working out in the morning. And then ideally within about an hour after a workout, we want to be getting in a source of protein. So that might look like, if you're working out before lunch, you have a lunch with some chicken or some fish or some tofu or some beans and lentils and things like that. So you're getting a source of protein to help to recover the muscles and help to kind of strengthen those muscles as well. And again, like we talked about, protein doesn't make you put on weight. We need the protein to be strengthening and supporting muscle growth. And the bigger and stronger our muscles are, the more we're going to be using those glucose sources or the carbohydrate sources and stuff as well. So fueling around that, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be snacking. If your breakfast, lunch, and dinner is satisfying you, that's great. But please don't starve yourself. It's not going to be
Please
worth
don't
it.
starve yourself.
Please don't starve yourself. Never, no matter what your goal is, please don't starve yourself. And if anyone wants to reach
Amazing.
out to me, for those that don't know, my email address is hello@lsnutrition.com.au. So if there's any other questions that kind of come through, feel free to shoot me an email there, or you can follow me on Instagram, which is Laura Sedgwick Nutrition, or just search LS Nutrition in Instagram and you'll find me there as well.
Amazing. We'll send all that out with the emails. So thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for your
Thank you
time.
so much for having me on, Paige. This is fun.